The smell of stale cedar and old paper always reminds me of Arthur. It's been 6 months since I buried the only man I ever loved, and the silence in our home in Savannah is a physical weight, pressing against my chest until I can hardly breathe. I thought I knew every corner of his soul. We spent 42 years together, building a life out of morning coffees, shared glances, and the quiet rhythm of a long marriage. But yesterday, I found the mahogany box hidden behind the loose floorboard in his attic workshop. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed by time and smelling faintly of a perfume I never wore. My hands shook as I broke the seal, and the first line shattered my world. My dearest Arthur, she can never know about the night in 1984 or the daughter we share. My heart didn't just break, it detonated. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe now to support me and motivate me to make more such videos. Do let me know in the comments of where you're watching from. The attic was a tomb of forgotten things, a space where the Georgia heat hummed against the rafters like a living thing. I sat there on the rough, dusty floorboards, the single light bulb swaying overhead, casting long, rhythmic shadows that felt like the ticking of a clock I could no longer stop. I am Eleanor Vance. At 68 years old, I had cultivated a life of elegant simplicity. I was a retired school teacher, a woman who prided herself on her ability to read people, to understand the subtext of a child's frown or a neighbor's sigh. But as I held that letter, I realized I had been illiterate in the language of my own home. Arthur was a man of iron and velvet. He was the kind of husband who remembered the specific way I liked my tea, steeped for exactly 4 minutes, no sugar, and the way he would instinctively reach for my hand whenever a siren wailed in the distance, a silent promise that we were safe as long as we were together. We had survived the greatest tragedy a couple can face, the loss of our firstborn, Thomas, who lived for only 3 hours in the winter of 1983. That grief had been the mortar of our marriage, or so I believed. I thought the cracks in our foundation had been filled with the strength of shared tears. I looked back at the letter, August 12th, 1984. My mind raced back to that year. It was the year of the great heat wave. The air in Savannah had been so thick you could almost chew it. I remembered Arthur telling me he needed to clear his head, that the ghost of Thomas was haunting the hallways of our house. He told me he was going to Charleston for a 2-week architectural seminar. I had kissed him goodbye at the door, smelling the starch on his shirt and the peppermint on his breath, feeling nothing but a deep, protective love for the man who was trying so hard to be okay for my sake. Now, 39 years later, the paper in my hand felt like a live wire. The handwriting was a looping feminine script, elegant, confident, and utterly foreign. I dug deeper into the mahogany box. Beneath the first letter lay a stack of others, bundled together with a piece of tattered blue ribbon. I didn't want to open them. A part of me screamed to take the box to the backyard, toss it into the fire pit, and watch the secrets turn to ash. But the teacher in me, the seeker of truth, couldn't stop. I pulled out a photograph. It was a Polaroid, the edges white and slightly curled. In it, Arthur was leaning against a weathered blue pier, the North Carolina coast stretching out behind him. He looked younger, vibrant, his eyes crinkled in a way they only did when he was truly, deeply happy. Standing beside him was a woman with wild, dark hair and a laugh you could almost hear through the static of the image. Her name, I would soon find out, was Clara, and tucked between them was a little girl, perhaps 3 years old, wearing a yellow sundress. She had Arthur's nose, that distinct, slightly Roman bridge, and his deep-set hazel eyes. The realization hit me like a physical blow to the solar plexus. I doubled over, my forehead resting on the dusty floor, gasping for air that felt too thin to support life. This wasn't a one-night stand. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment fueled by grief. This was a parallel universe. As I sifted through the letters, a horrific timeline began to emerge. Arthur hadn't just visited them once. He had been a phantom in their lives for 4 decades. I found receipts for jewelry I'd never seen, a sapphire pendant, a pearl bracelet. I found carbon copies of money orders sent every month like clockwork to an address in Ocracoke. We were never wealthy. We lived on my teacher's pension and his modest income from the hardware store. I had spent years clipping coupons, choosing generic brands, and delaying the repairs on our leaking roof because Arthur insisted we needed to save for the rainy day. The rain was already falling, it seemed. It was falling on a woman named Clara and a daughter named Sarah in a house by the sea, funded by the sacrifices I had made in the name of our shared future. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the attic in hues of bruised purple and gold, I felt like a stranger in my own skin. I looked at my wedding ring. A simple gold band. I wondered if he had bought hers at the same time. I wondered if he used the same words of devotion when he slipped it onto her finger. The betrayal wasn't just in the act, it was in the silence. It was in the thousands of days he looked me in the eye, ate the meals I cooked, and slept in the bed we shared, all while carrying the weight of an entire other family in his heart. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room, surrounded by the furniture we had picked out together. Every piece felt tainted. That armchair where he read the Sunday paper? A lie. The dining table where we celebrated birthdays? A facade. I felt like an extra in a play that had been running for 40 years, unaware that the lead actor was rehearsing a different script in the wings. At dawn, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't live with the what-ifs. I needed to see the life he had built behind my back. I packed a small bag, threw the mahogany box into the passenger seat of my Buick, and began the long drive north. The journey from Savannah to the Outer Banks is a scenic one, but I saw nothing but the road and the flickering ghosts of my past. I thought about the fishing trips Arthur took every October. He would come home smelling of salt and beer, his skin bronzed by the sun, bringing back stories of the big one that got away. I had always laughed, teased him about his lack of skill, and welcomed him home with his favorite pot roast. Now I realized the big one hadn't gotten away at all. He had been going home to them. I arrived in Ocracoke as the afternoon light was beginning to soften. It's a small, isolated place, reachable only by ferry. The isolation felt appropriate. It was the perfect place to hide a life. I found the address from the money orders, a small salt-shaker cottage painted a weathered blue, tucked behind a screen of sea oats. I sat in my car, my hands gripped so tightly around the steering wheel that my knuckles were white. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. What was I hoping to find? An apology? A monster? Then, the front door opened. A woman stepped out. She was older, perhaps in her late 60s like me, but she moved with a grace that felt coastal and free. Her hair was a silver mane, and she was wearing a simple linen dress. She sat on a porch swing, a glass of iced tea in her hand, looking out toward the sound. This was Clara. This was the woman who had shared my husband's heart for 40 years. I stepped out of the car. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and unresponsive. I walked across the sandy road, the sound of my footsteps muffled. As I reached the edge of her yard, she looked up. There was no shock in her eyes. There was only a profound, weary recognition. She set her tea down on a small side table and stood up. "I've been expecting you for a long time, Eleanor," she said. Her voice was low and melodic, with a North Carolina lilt. "He's dead," I said. It was the only thing I could manage to say. The words felt like stones in my mouth. "I know," she whispered. "I felt the world get colder 6 months ago. When the letters stopped, I knew. Arthur was a man of habit. He would never have left me wondering if he were still breathing." I climbed the steps to the porch and stood before her. Up close, I could see the lines of age on her face, but she was beautiful in a way that I was not. She looked like a woman who had been loved in secret, a woman who had accepted the crumbs of a man's life and turned them into a feast. "How could you do it?" I asked, the anger finally bubbling up through the numbness. "How could you let him live this lie? You knew about me. You knew he had a wife in Savannah." Clara looked at me with a sadness so deep it felt like an ocean. "He told me he was going to leave you in the beginning. He told me he couldn't breathe in that house in Savannah, that the grief of your lost son was choking him, and I believed him. By the time I realized he was never going to leave, I was already carrying Sarah. And then I realized that Arthur was a man who couldn't choose because he didn't want to hurt anyone. He thought by staying with you and keeping us a secret, he was being kind." "Kind?" I spat. "He was a coward." "Yes," she agreed simply. "He was, but he was a coward who loved us both in ways he didn't know how to fix." The front door opened again, and a woman in her late 30s stepped out. It was Sarah. Seeing her in person was like seeing a ghost. She was the image of Arthur, the same tilted smile, the same way of holding her shoulders. She looked at me and her eyes widened. "Mom?" she asked. "This is Eleanor Sarah," Clara said. Sarah didn't look angry. She looked devastated. She walked over to me, her eyes searching my face. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I told him he should tell you. I told him every year since I turned 18 that this wasn't right. But he was so afraid of losing your respect. He worshipped the version of himself that you saw." We sat on that porch for hours as the sun dipped below the horizon. They told me about their Arthur, the man who taught Sarah how to fish, the man who sat in the front row of her nursing school graduation while I was home, thinking he was at a hardware convention in Atlanta. They told me about the man who cried on Clara's shoulder every Christmas Eve because he couldn't be in 2 places at once. I felt a strange, jarring dissonance. The Arthur they described was my Arthur, and yet he wasn't. He was a man split in 2, a man who had spent 40 years living in the shadows of his own making. "Why did you stay?" I asked Clara. "Why didn't you demand more?" Clara looked out at the water. "Because half of Arthur was better than all of any other man I'd ever met, and because I knew that if I forced him to choose, he would have chosen you. Not out of love, perhaps, but out of duty. And I didn't want him that way." Her words were a knife to the heart. He would have chosen me out of duty. All these years I thought I was the love of his life. Now I realized I was the obligation, the respectable wife, the safe harbor. I left them that night and checked into a local inn. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window and watched the lighthouse beams sweep across the room over and over again, a rhythmic reminder of the truth that had been hidden in the dark. The next day, I went back to the blue cottage. I didn't go for Clara. I went for Sarah. I needed to see the daughter I was never able to have. We walked along the beach, the sand cold beneath our feet. He talked about you constantly, Sarah told me. He told me how brilliant you were, how you could recite Keats by heart, how you made the best blackberry jam in Georgia. He wanted me to be like you, Eleanor. He wanted me to have your grace. Then why didn't he let me know you? I asked, my voice breaking. I would have loved you, Sarah. I lost my son. I would have welcomed a daughter. Sarah stopped and looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears. Because he was ashamed. He thought if you knew what he'd done, you'd never look at him the same way again. He wanted to be the hero in your story, even if he was the villain in ours. That was the crux of it. Arthur's vanity had been the architect of our misery. He had prioritized his own image over the hearts of the 3 women who loved him most. I stayed in Ocracoke for a week. I spent time with Sarah's children, my husband's grandchildren. They called me Miss Eleanor, and I watched them play with a bittersweet ache in my chest. They had Arthur's laugh, they had his curiosity. They were the only good things to come out of this wreckage. Before I left, Clara handed me a small wooden box. It wasn't mahogany, it was driftwood, smoothed by the sea. "These are for you," she said. Inside were letters Arthur had written to her, but never sent. They were letters about me. Clara. Today Eleanor wore that blue dress I like, the one that matches the Savannah sky in October. I looked at her and felt a crushing weight of guilt. She is so good, so pure. She deserves a man who is whole, not a man who is divided by the sea. I don't know how to tell her. I don't know how to break the only heart that has ever truly belonged to me. Another one read, "Sarah is starting kindergarten tomorrow. I should be there, but Eleanor has a school board meeting and she's nervous. I have to be the husband she thinks I am. I am a ghost in my own life, Clara. I am haunting 2 houses and living in neither." Reading those letters, I felt the rage begin to thaw. It didn't disappear, but it shifted into something else. A profound, bone-deep pity. What a miserable way to live. To never be fully present. To always be looking over your shoulder. To spend 40 years rehearsing a lie. I drove back to Savannah with the mahogany box and the driftwood box sitting side by side on the passenger seat. The house felt different when I walked through the door. The silence was still there, but the weight of it had changed. It wasn't the silence of a tomb anymore, it was the silence of a clean slate. I didn't burn the letters. I didn't throw away the photos. Instead, I did something Arthur never had the courage to do. I told the truth. I called our friends. I told them about Sarah. I told them about Clara. I didn't do it to spite Arthur. I did it to free myself. I refused to carry his secrets for him. I refused to be a part of the deception any longer. Some people were shocked. Some were judgmental. Some walked away from me, unable to handle the messiness of the reality. But those who stayed, those were my real friends. I eventually sold the big house in Savannah. I bought a small apartment near the park, a place with high ceilings and plenty of light. I kept the furniture that I truly loved, and I gave the rest away. I started a correspondence with Sarah. We write to each other once a month. She tells me about the kids, about her work at the hospital. I tell her about the books I'm reading, about the garden I'm planting on my balcony. We don't talk about Arthur much. We don't need to. He is the bridge that brought us together, even if the bridge was built on a foundation of sand. A year after I found the box, I went back to the cemetery. I stood before Arthur's headstone. "Beloved husband and friend," it said. I looked at those words for a long time. They weren't a lie, exactly. He was beloved. He was a husband. He was a friend. He was just also a liar, a coward, and a man who was desperately afraid of being seen. I knelt down and placed a single sprig of sea oats on the grave. "I know you now, Arthur," I whispered, "the whole of you, and I forgive you, not for what you did, but for the man you weren't brave enough to be." As I walked away, I felt a lightness I hadn't felt in 40 years. The truth hadn't destroyed me. It had dismantled the life I thought I had, but it had given me something much more valuable, a life that was real. I am 69 years old now. I spend my days volunteering at the local library, helping people find the stories they need. I see a lot of people looking for escapes, looking for lives that are tidier and more beautiful than their own. I always tell them the same thing. The most beautiful story is the one that's true, even if it's messy, even if it hurts. The letter I found after his death changed everything. It took away the husband I thought I knew, but it gave me a daughter, a family I never expected, and most importantly, it gave me back my own life. I am no longer a character in Arthur Vance's play. I am the narrator of my own story. I sit on my balcony in the evenings, watching the sun set over the Savannah steeples. The air smells of jasmine and salt. I think about Clara in her blue cottage, and I hope she is at peace. We were two sides of the same coin, two women who loved a man who didn't know how to be whole. I realize now that love isn't about perfection. It isn't about the absence of secrets. It's about the courage to stand in the light together. Arthur didn't have that courage, but I do. And in the end, that is my victory. I survived the truth. I survived the betrayal. And I found beauty in the ruins. Every morning, I wake up and I make my tea, steeped for 4 minutes. No sugar. I sit at my small table and I look at the photos on the wall. There's one of me and Sarah, taken last summer when she came to visit. We're standing in front of the fountain in Forsyth Park, laughing. She has his eyes. She has my smile. We are the legacy he left behind. Not the lies, not the secrets, but the connection that survived them. The mahogany box is tucked away in the back of my closet now. It doesn't haunt me anymore. It's just a box. The power it held was the power of the unknown, and now that everything is known, it's just wood and paper. Life is a long, winding road, and we never know what's around the next bend. We might find a treasure, or we might find a wreckage, but as long as we keep walking, as long as we keep seeking the light, we'll find our way home. I am Eleanor Vance. I am a widow, a teacher, a friend, and a mother in my own way. I am a woman who knows the truth. And for the first time in my 69 years, I am finally, truly happy. The weight is gone, the silence is full, and the story, my story, is just beginning. I often think about that first moment in the attic, the way the world seemed to tilt on its axis. I wish I could go back and tell that terrified woman that she was going to be okay, that the shattering of her world was actually the breaking of a shell, that something new and strong was waiting to grow in the cracks, but she had to find that out for herself. We all do. We have to walk through the fire to find the cool water on the other side. I look out at the stars tonight, the same stars Arthur and I used to watch from our backyard. They seem brighter now, clearer. Maybe because I'm no longer trying to see them through the fog of a lie. I am free. And that is the most beautiful thing of all. I've started writing my own letters now, not to a secret lover, but to myself. I write about the things I've learned, the things I've lost, and the things I've found. I write about the strength of women and the frailty of men. I write about the sea and the city, and the way they both hold on to the past. Maybe one day someone will find my letters in a box. I hope they do. And I hope they read them and realize that even in the darkest moments, there is a way through, that the truth is always worth the cost. I think of Sarah's children, Arthur's grandchildren. I want them to grow up in a world where secrets don't have to be hidden in mahogany boxes. I want them to know that it's okay to be flawed as long as you're honest about it. I'll see them again next month. We're going to the beach. We're going to build sand castles and watch the tide come in. We're going to laugh and talk and be a family, a real family with no shadows between us. Arthur is gone, but the love remains. It's different now, honester, sharper, more real, and I think in his own way he'd be proud of us. He'd be relieved that the burden is finally gone. The light in the hallway is soft, welcoming. I go to bed now, not as a widow mourning a saint, but as a woman who has found her own way. Sleep comes easily these days. The dreams are no longer haunted by questions. They are filled with the ocean, the city, and the faces of the people I love. I am Eleanor, and I am whole. The road behind me is long and winding, filled with shadows and light, but the road ahead is clear. I don't know where it leads, and for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that. The truth has set me free, and I am finally home. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more stories. Now I want to hear from you. What was the best part you liked in this story? Please drop a comment and let me know.